But again, just want to say welcome everyone, no matter, let's say, the time zone you're tuning in from. A warm welcome to the webinar, and of course, great to have you all here today. Thank you. Hi, Ruth. Hi, Xuan. Yeah, so while waiting for the other participants to join, probably let's do a waterfall activity. Kindly share your name, your organization, and where you're from. Hi, Arm. Hi, hi, Sipeng. Yeah, so once again, a warm welcome to all of you today, especially to our friends from Afghanistan, Australia, Bangladesh, Republic of Congo, France, Ghana, India, Indonesia, Republic of Korea, Malawi, Malaysia, Nepal. We have New Zealand, Nigeria, from the Philippines, Solomon Islands, South Africa, Tanzania, Thailand, Uganda, and Vietnam. So once again, welcome everyone to Learn by the Nuggets, GPT 101 or Global Plastics Treaty 101, a primer on the ongoing negotiations for the International Agreement on Plastic Pollution. Once again, I'm Trish. I'm the Network Development and Member Engagement Officer of GAIA Asia Pacific, currently based here in Manila, Philippines. So I'll be one of the GAIA staff supporting you today for this webinar. So this webinar, as you may know, is organized by the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, or GAIA. GAIA is a network of grassroots groups as well as national and regional alliances representing more than 8,000 organizations spanning across 92 countries. We envision a just zero-waste world built on respect for ecological limits and community rights, where people are free from the burden of toxic pollution and resources are sustainably conserved, not burned or dumped. We work to catalyze a global shift towards environmental justice by strengthening grassroots groups that advance solutions to waste and pollution. So to know more, you may simply visit us at www.no-burn.org and or simply just check it on the chat box. So we are recording this live. This will be available on the GAIA Asia Pacific's Facebook page. And for the participants, you may post additional questions and speakers will post their answers. The recorded session will be uploaded to our official YouTube channel as well. So for context, this webinar will dive into the critical importance of the Global Plastics Treaty, or GPT, and the pivotal role of international cooperation in combating plastic pollution. We'll cover the treaty's goals, the INC or the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee process, and lessons from past negotiations, the role of civil society, national governments, and the media to simply equip you with an understanding on how to engage in the treaty process. Our experts here will highlight the essential aspects of the prospective agreement, demands of civil society and key actors, and how the treaty will affect national work in combating plastic pollution. But before we dive in, just a couple of points on logistics. So this webinar will last in an hour and a half. Kindly use the Q&A section on your screen in Zoom to send questions to the speakers. And probably later we may just unmute those in Zoom for their questions. But unfortunately, we cannot guarantee that we can accommodate everyone. So just a gentle reminder that questions can still be posted a few minutes after the session. So if you have any technical issues in Zoom, kindly connect to the GAIA staff who will be supporting us today through the chat box. And just to give you a quick view on what's going to happen in the next an hour and a half. So we will have a quick introduction of the speakers, and then we'll lead directly to why is there a need for international agreement, the key ingredients of an effective treaty, the progress on negotiations, where we're at so far, highlighting the role of civil society, some advocacy tactics and lobbying, and lastly, different ways for you to engage. Like what can you do, say, as an individual or as an organization? So first and foremost, let me just introduce you to our exciting lineup of speakers. We have Semee Rhee from Break Free from Plastic, Abdul Ghofar from Walmi National, and also representing Aliansi Zero Waste Indonesia, Xuan Quach from Vietnam Zero Waste Alliance. We also have Kabir Arora from Alliance of Indian Wastepickers. We have Rocha, Arpita, Bhagat from GAIA. We also have Merissa Naidoo from GAIA and BFFP Africa. So once again, presenting to you our experts today. And as always, I don't want to keep you waiting. So let me hand it over to you, Arpita.
Thank you so much, Trish, and thank you to all who have joined from across so many different countries. This webinar, just to say, has not been easy to put together, given that we are very close to the next INC next month. I really want to appreciate our speakers, our participants who've made time to come and join us today. And this is not the first time we are doing a primer, but this might be the last time. So I do appreciate you taking the time and hoping that this particular webinar can be used for a long time to come and to set up the baseline for understanding what the Global Plastics Treaty is about. Next slide, please. So my job today is to just lay the groundwork for our speakers to come. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of what is the Global Plastics Treaty, why was it needed, and where and how it started. And then I'll pass on to my colleague, Merissa Naidoo, who is going to take you through the progress in negotiations so far. So just to get you started on the next slide, plastic life cycle can actually be more appropriately called plastic pollution cycle. You may already know that plastics are made up of fossil fuels. About 90% of plastics actually comes from oil, the same that caused climate crises. And for a long time, this information was not well known, and plastic pollution was seen more of a problem of waste management, improper disposal, marine litter, and lack of adequate facilities and so on. And if we allowed industry to go on with the status quo, this might still be the case where you see majority of the investment and so-called innovation still going into false technologies, such as burning of plastic waste in different ways, as well as greenwashing. And we continue to see this happen in the background of the treaty negotiations as well. So you can imagine then that this pollution, rather injustices to human animal life and harm to ecosystems, really begins, as you can see in this figure, from the extraction of fossil fuels, either as coal, oil, or gas. And this is the big fight that we are fighting in the negotiations room, but also outside of it. So it's very important that we speak to each other and remind ourselves where the plastic cycle starts. Every step of this cycle not only reinforces the climate crisis with respect to greenhouse gas emissions, but also the crisis of human rights, the crisis of toxics, the crisis of livelihood, land rights, right to clean air, and healthy environment, access to water, and essential social justice measures, which are encroached upon by those employed in refineries, for example, and different production facilities, as well as those living in the vicinities of these facilities, living in the vicinities of dumping sites, and so on. And we have different kinds of impacts from the plastic life cycle, but especially the invisible impacts that go unheard and unnoticed by the layman, from microplastics or pellets, the toxic additives, non-intentionally added substances and polymers production and disposal. We now know that microplastics are present in human blood, about 1.6 microgram of plastic particles per milliliter of blood sample of has been found in human beings, as well as in human placenta, which should really be alarming and disturbing for us. but this is what industry doesn't want you to know. And at the same time, if you look at the next slide, the demand for plastic is increasing almost by 40% over the next decade, which will account for 20% of overall oil consumption. And I do understand that this probably doesn't sound enough, but at this level, the GHG emissions from plastic life cycle would threaten the ability of global community and the climate movement to keep the fight for global temperature to stay below 1.5 degrees, which is another important reason, another important reminder that we should be careful. And even so, this is the case. In 2025, plastic production is expected to reach over 600 million tons. And we know for a fact, and we know from our domestic situations, and we know from our local neighborhoods that recycling alone is not enough and cannot cope with such volumes of waste. So we should be really concerned that global production continues to rise. And over the next 70 years, you can see the drastic increase in plastic production. On the next slide, you can also see that recycling curve cannot even come close to matching this problem. So we are in the midst of a big problem, but we know that the opportunity is ahead of us, is amidst us. Industry is feeling the heat of all of the efforts that the civil society and the governments are pushing. But industry being industry, they also say that, no, we don't have a problem. We have this new thing and we can handle this. And this new thing often comes in the form of, oh, we can do it through recycling. And this is often chemical recycling. We can recover the energy, which we know is problematic issue. And something that we should remind ourselves is that you can't create or destroy matter. So when you apply chemical recycling to plastic, which is essentially a chemical which is toxic, you get toxins out. They just come in different forms, whether as emissions, as dirty fuels, as contaminated water, and an incredibly small amount of reusable plastic. And we should know this. We should know by now that recycling as a rationale to continue business as usual is absolutely not acceptable. And therefore, the logical response is to eventually stop and cut the plastic production to sustainable limits and limit the use of plastic to only essential uses. And my colleagues are going to talk more about that in the time to come. Next slide. So the global problem that we have with us requires a global solution. And Inger Anderson herself called this the most instrumental opportunity. Plastic is a transboundary issue, and we require a unified, legally binding response. And the treaty, therefore, is the first opportunity to really address what national regulations have not been able to. That is the problem of global plastic production, global plastic pollution, global finance. To tackle this problem. It's also the first global avenue to unlock systemic change to really move our economy away from plastic at pace and at scale that is necessary. This is also the first international framework that could potentially address plastic across its life cycle. And a strong treaty could push the entire petrochemical, plastic, and FMCG industry to shift towards reuse and environmentally sound design. There is the potential here to hold the signing countries, the countries which become party to this international agreement, to a high common minimum standard of action. It could help in harmonization of the current heterogeneous plastic regulatory landscape, which would reduce technical complexity, operational costs, as well as compliance costs. So we know different national legislation, extended producer responsibility, single-use plastic bans, waste management laws that exist across the world. But of course, the form in which they exist, the standards are very, very different. And therefore, this kind of treaty could create this minimum high standard that is required. And this treaty is also special in the sense that MEAs, multilateral environmental agreements, usually focus on one particular matter. We know about the Montreal Protocol, we know about the Minamata Convention, but plastics treaty really is one of its kind to try to address a very complex material and solve that issue. Because you can imagine plastics are not just involved in packaging of material. Plastics are involved in electronic products. Plastics are involved in textile. Plastics are involved in aviation and so on. So really, global rules which include upstream measures. Upstream measures are measures which look at the problem at the start, at the extraction and production level, would provide a kind of predictability and control to national governments to reduce their domestic plastic management burden and the cost for creating their own regulatory regime. Common global rules would also benefit governments, especially our governments in low-income countries. A lot of you are coming from global south, so you know what I'm talking about. So instead, if we didn't have a treaty and we were individually meant to develop our own regulatory and technical sort of solutions to stop plastic pollution, the aggregate cost to the international community would be significantly higher, which is why, again, it's a reminder to take this opportunity and really tap into it and ensure that we are able to solve this problem. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so just very briefly how we got here. This treaty was 5 years in the making, and successive efforts at each of the UNEA meetings, United Nations Environmental Assembly, starting from UNEA 3 in 2017, and UNEA first, where plastics was really addressed as a marine litter problem, to UNEA 3 and 4, where there was an agreement reached to establish this open-ended expert group to address plastic pollution, and there really being recognition that there is an international instrument that's required came together. And then in 2022, in UNEA 5.2, we had the dramatic shift and the final agreement on the mandate 5/14 to create this international legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. And so this resolution also called for the convening of open-ended working group to prepare INC's work, which happened in the summer of 2022 in Senegal. Countries negotiated draft rules of procedure for the INC, nominated representatives from different regions for the Bureau, and discussed different procedural matters. And we will hear more about this process from Merissa coming up after me. But just moving on, we need to also at the same time remind ourselves, next slide please. This is I think my last slide, that treaty really is the vehicle. It's the result of many years of organizing by our movement, and some of you here might have been involved in that. But even if we end with a weak treaty, it would have still strengthened our efforts at the national level, where we are leveraging this increased global and national attentions on plastic pollution to push for more stronger national advocacies. And our members present here will be talking about that a little bit more. We will know that the work eventually, the implementation when it comes to, even after the treaty is ratified, will come down to national level. It's the national delegations who think about national priorities and laws, and they are the ones negotiating the treaty. So a strong treaty can really push national ambition and vice versa. And we could have gained a lot, not just through this advocacy and lobbying that we are doing, but also through the movement building, bringing together different people, all of you here, building together people from different movements and trying to address this issue. And lastly, not only diplomacy, our organizing movement is building the policy advocacy, doing narrative shift. So you might be able to participate in an INC, you might not. But we need to remember that we need to think about the treaty beyond the treaty. My time is up, but here is the treaty process timeline. Merissa is going to talk more about it. We have an upcoming INC next month, just barely a few weeks from now, where the revised draft would be discussed, and hoping to have the final draft ready by the end of this year, and finally the signing and adoption following the year after. but more of that coming up. Thank you so much for listening. Passing it on.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rocha. I'm the director of the Global Plastic Program with GAIA. It is a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Global Plastic Treaty, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how it relates to the Global South and what we need to make sure that we actually have an effective treaty moving forward. So Arpita has talked a lot about how we got to the treaty and where we are in this process. But I would like to emphasize the fact that the treaty is actually a consequence of global South advocacy. So it started with the Rwanda-Peru resolution, which originated the discussions that took us to resolution 514, which is the resolution that started the negotiation process. So the treaty started in the global South with the goal of addressing some of the pressing issues that we have in the global South. And some of these opportunities that we have for the global South, some of the issues that we are trying to address are the historical inequality and the double standards that we are all familiar with, especially in relation to waste trade, for example, subsidies and things like that. And then demand a ban on waste trade. Again, it's a way to align with the Basel Convention and make sure that the provisions that we already got in the Basel Conventions can be enforced. Support human rights and social justice demands. And here it comes the inclusion of Wastepickers, indigenous populations, and other groups into the treaty text. Push for important legally binding agreements that create accountability for plastic and oil producing countries. That's a very important part, and I'm going to talk more about this a little bit further. But the truth is that the treaty can only achieve its full potential of impact if we actually address production. Because only thinking about waste management is basically insufficient for us to solve the plastic crisis that we are in. And then ensure that the full life cycle of plastics is addressed. We cannot talk about pieces. We have a whole chain, a whole production system, a whole consumption system that is problematic and that has brought us to the crisis that we are in. So we need to think about the treaty from extraction of oil all the way to waste management and promote sustainable production and consumption. And that is apart from, again, something that Arpita has already covered about the 3 dimensions of the treaty, which are talking about the negotiations themselves. So that's basically when we are talking about the treaty text and what is going to come out of it. The movement building, which is how we work together to achieve common goals. And then the national level advocacy that we all do, and that it's important for the treaty to be ratified and for the treaty to then be effective in our countries. So it's basically a huge opportunity for us to use global policy to influence local context. And that's why the treaty has so many ramifications. And when we are working the treaty, we are actually working in different ways. There are several organizations working in different ways to try to enforce the treaty. So how can we have an effective treaty? How can we actually have a treaty that addresses what we want to address? It comes back to, as I was saying, plastic production. And so if you think about the amount of plastics that we have been producing and the scale in which the plastic production has been increasing along the years, and it's projected to increase as we go, it's very clear that that's not a problem that can be solved if we don't actually start producing less plastics. There is plastics everywhere. There is plastics accumulated, 9.2 million tons of plastics accumulated since 1950. We have plastics that are still in use, that have been incinerated, and that means basically greenhouse gas emissions and microplastics in the atmosphere and all of that. And then there is a lot of plastic that has been discarded, and that plastic basically becomes a legacy problem because it's not something that we have actually a good way to address, and very little that has been recycled. Because we are not actually able to recycle all the plastics that we produce. So that's why we need to think about how we phase out and we phase down different kinds of plastics. So the first thing that we need to do, again, once we think about the production and we think about the plastic that we want to phase down, the plastic that we want to phase out, it's important for us to make sure that we eliminate toxics. Plastics are extremely toxic. Plastics actually contain a lot of hazardous materials, hazardous chemicals that end up having a very significant impact in our lives and also in the lives of people that have to handle plastics, like Wastepickers, for example. And so eliminate all toxics in plastics is one of the ways that we can have an effective treaty. We also need to make sure that we don't create loopholes. So one of the things about this is that we cannot try to create solutions to a problem that can only be addressed with plastic production reduction. So we cannot think about chemical recycling, which we all know it's harmful and it's going to destroy our communities. We cannot think about cement kiln and incineration. We cannot think about plastic credits that only shift unfairness from region to region. We cannot think about greenwashing. We cannot think about bio-based plastics as a solution. So plastics are not made of fossil fuels, but are made of renewable materials. And that at the end of the day are plastics, and they only decompose in very particular conditions. So we cannot create exceptions to those. We cannot think about carbon capture in that process. And we can definitely not allow any kind of environmental injustice, worker exploitation, and dispossession of indigenous peoples to be included. So we cannot create a situation in which in 50 years from now, we are going to be thinking about, okay, did we actually make things better or did we actually make things worse with the plastic treaty? And we need to make sure that we create polluter and producer accountability. So I'll say that again, when you think about the plastics treaty, if we don't address production, if we don't make the producer accountable for what they're putting out there, we will not be able to have the impact that we are hoping to have through this process. We also need to make sure that we are scaling up reuse, and there is reuse, there is refurbishing, there are many processes here that create jobs, that give people opportunity for income generation, that keep materials being used for longer, which means that we don't need to discard, dispose, and then produce more. We can actually keep those in the market. So there are many processes here that we need to make sure that we include in the treaty, so that again, in 50 years from now, we are not actually asking ourselves, did we just replace one problem with another problem, or did we actually solve the problem that we were trying to solve, which was the plastics crisis? And we need to make sure that we have a just transition for workers, including Wastepickers. So we have Wastepickers that have, I actually was listening to very inspiring Wastepicker speak today. And one of the things that she said is that Wastepickers wake up every morning and they go to the streets and they remove plastics from the environment where we live, and they improve our health through that process. And as much as we are aware and we are advocating for production reduction, for a systemic change that is going to actually solve the plastics crisis, we need to make sure that as we do that, we are not leaving this workforce, which are the people that have for decades now been making this crisis less intense than it could be. Like, it looks bad, it feels bad the way it is, it could be much worse if waste speakers are not there every day addressing the problem and making sure that the plastics that are in the environment actually get collected, are actually sent for recycling, and that people make an income from this process. So the just transition for workers is extremely important. We need to make sure that the beneficiaries of the treaty are the people and not the companies, not the industries that created the problems that we're trying to solve. So with that, that's a very short overview. The plastic treaty is a very intense and it's a very complex process. We are still trying to define the level of detail that the treaty is going to embrace. And so there is much more than that. And I am more than happy to eventually engage with people that are interested and to create opportunities for you to engage at the national level, in the movement building part, or to participate in discussions and everything. We cannot all go to the negotiations. Some people go, but we cannot all go. But I think this is a little bit of an overview about the treaty process and the things that we have been prioritizing. We are now almost at INC 4, which is the fourth round of negotiations. And so we are going to very soon be talking again about plastic production and talking about the reduction, talking about phasing out and phasing down different kinds of plastics and how we can actually do this in an effective way. We are going to be talking about financial mechanisms and how we're going to finance this work that needs to happen, how the countries will finance a transition in their economies and all of that. And so, again, the treaty is a complex process, but it's also a very important one. And I think there is a lot of opportunity to engage. And I would love to actually see more people advocating and voicing what we need in the treaty so that we can actually move forward together. So with that, I say thank you. It was a pleasure to be here and looking forward to engaging further.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to some of you all in different time zones. I think that was a great presentation from Anna and also from Arpita, who really provided a really good overview of where we're at in the process of the Plastics Treaty, how we got there, and what are some of the demands and the ingredients for an effective treaty moving forward. So it now gives me a great pleasure to actually speak to you all about how the negotiations have actually progressed so far. And I do this bearing in mind something that Anna just said at the end of her presentation, that whilst we may not be all able to be physically present at the negotiations itself, there's definitely impact that we can have back home nationally with our national governments. So taking that forward and taking that in mind, I'd like to now present to you how the negotiations have actually progressed so far from INC 1 all the way up until INC 3 and looking ahead at INC 4. So if we look at INC 1, INC 1 saw a basically, no, we can go back to that slide, a basic imbalance between procedural power versus people power. And that is how INC 1 was actually met. Next slide, please. The INC 1 took place in Uruguay between the 28th of November and the 2nd of December. And some of the key highs from the INC 1 included during the first week of negotiations, we saw much time during INC 1 being spent on plenary statements from member states, many of which supported a strong binding plastics treaty with a focus on reducing plastic production and use, and also recognizing the severe harms of plastic pollution across its life cycle, agreeing on the need to support and explore a good and strong financial mechanism for the implementation of the treaty. We also saw strong participation from member states from Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and the Pacific nations. And all of these countries and these key regions have been really championing a strong treaty throughout this process. We also saw strong engagement from small island developing states, which is particularly notable in bringing a strong voice for urgency and high ambition in these treaty negotiations. The leadership of Wastepickers in INC1 also resulted in the launch of the Just Transition Initiative, which was building upon the earlier iteration of the group of friends of Wastepickers. And this would ensure that Wastepickers are represented across future INCs, bringing visibility of more than 20 million people who work as Wastepickers worldwide. So those were a few key highs from the INC1, but the INC1 was also met with a few key lows. Next slide, please. And as I said at the beginning, these key lows were all around procedural issues. Firstly, advocates expressed concerns about the presence of leading corporate polluters in the negotiating process and the lack of transparency from UNEP on how many of them were actually hiding behind NGO badges. So within the negotiation process, we see a lot of conflict of interest creeping up into this space. Additionally, precious negotiating time during INC1 and resources were allocated to a multi-stakeholder forum, which was more of a ploy to keep NGOs and key voices at the sidelines of the INC as opposed to being within the negotiation room. Not much content was discussed at INC1. There was not much content discussion, and it was more of opening statements and plenary statements from member states. The key thing here to note for INC1 is that it extended its provisional adoption of the draft rules of procedure after discussions failed to reach a resolution on these contentious issues. To go a little bit deeper into what the draft rules of procedure is, the draft rules of procedure will essentially define how negotiations proceed. And this was provisionally adopted in the open-ended working group in May 2022 ahead of the negotiations. Now, this draft rules of procedure has been bringing up several contentious issues on voting versus consensus and how that should actually play out in the treaty negotiations. Next slide, please. So we now move on to INC2, and the draft rules of procedure continue to be something that hinders the negotiation process. So the battle that took place in Parras, UNESCO Parras, between 29th May and the 2nd of June. Next slide, please. So some of the key expectations of the INC2 was that the negotiations were expected to focus on the UNEP options paper, which included defining the treaty objectives, control measures, and aspects of implementation, and to conclude by issuing a mandate for the treaty revised zero draft to be prepared for INC3. So the zero draft is actually the document that will form the basis of negotiations. And it so did at INC3, which I will take you through in a moment. And essentially, this zero draft was meant to be drafted on the basis of member states expressing their positions at INC2, as well as rights holders and industry groups being able to contribute to the submissions. UNEP proposed streamlining the opening statements at INC2, and we also had two contact groups, the first contact group being on objectives and control measures, and the second contact group being on means of implementation and additional matters at INC2. Next slide, please. So what were some of the outcomes then of INC2 if those were our expectations? The first 2 days of INC 2, we saw progress on substantive issues being held hostage by a small handful of large oil and plastic producing countries who raised procedural issues to delay discussions and have veto power over the treaty by advocating for a consensus only with no opportunity for voting if consensus cannot be reached. So again, bringing up the draft rules of procedure to waste time when we could be discussing substantive issues around the treaty. The draft rules of procedure were still not adopted and remain applicable provisionally as agreed at INC 1, even up till now. Countries agreed to an interpretive statement on Rule 38.1, which was around voting and consensus. And countries, particularly from Africa and Europe, championed the need to protect voting within the INC rules. After 2 secret ballots, the Bureau was finally confirmed, being Rwanda and Senegal from Africa, Japan, Jordan, Georgia, Estonia, Ecuador, Sweden, the United States, Antigua and Barbuda, and Peru as being the chair elected at INC 1. Next slide, please. Other key outcomes included, we had a successful demonstration by 100+ members from civil society organizations, scientists, and rights holders who had an action highlighting the lack of access to negotiations, calling on countries to make more space for experts. Many countries also underscored the need for a treaty that includes production caps, elimination of problematic plastics and chemicals, coverage across the entire plastic supply chain, and protection of the most impacted and vulnerable communities from plastic pollution. The Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee also requested the chair to support the Secretariat in preparing the zero draft text for the international binding agreement for consideration at INC 3. This draft, again, was meant to be guided by views expressed by member states and others at INC 1 and INC 2. The committee had also requested the Secretariat to invite submissions from member states and NGOs on elements that were not being able to discuss at INC 2, such as on principles and scope of the instrument and the treaty. Next slide, please. So INC 3 was where we saw the Nairobi spirit really up against the petrochemical alumni, where we saw ambition meeting a stalled quest for progress. And that was INC 3 at Nairobi between the 13th and the 19th of November of 2023. Apologies for the date there. Next slide, please. So this is what INC 3 negotiations were expected to engage on. We were expecting substantive discussions to be discussed around the zero draft, that is the initial draft of the treaty text, which contained options for control measures and means of implementation. And we expected that to progress us to the mandate of the first draft of the treaty text by INC 4, paving a clear roadmap on intersessional work. However, that expectation was not nearly as met as we would have appreciated it to have been. Next slide, please. So these were the outcomes then. Member states got through the first reading of the zero draft, which in the view of many was a well-balanced document that captured this full suite of views and positions expressed by countries at previous 2 INCs and could really serve for the basis of negotiations. The concept of just transition gained traction thanks to the advocacy efforts of Wastepickers and Indigenous peoples. However, a newly formed group called the Like-Minded Group, which is also known as the Global Coalition for Plastic Sustainability, which is a group of plastic-producing countries, was set on challenging the zero draft. Next slide, please. These countries have repeatedly sought to delay progress within the negotiations, pushing a waste management focus and rejecting work on the upstream part of the plastic pollution issue. However, amidst the hostility, the African group of negotiators and PSIDs stood upright and firm against this bullying and bad faith obstructionism, representing the voice of the collective conscious. Next slide, please. Despite the efforts by these progressive nations to salvage the third round of negotiations, a critical point was reached, and failure to agree on the scope and format for intersessional work signaled a rupture in the process. We now have currently a bloated, revised zero draft as opposed to a first draft of the treaty text, where all options and even null options remain on the table, as opposed to a first treaty draft. We also do not have a mandate for intersessional work going into the INC4. And we went from a balanced state to a state of entropy, which will make the next round of negotiations at INC4 in Canada rather challenging. However, at INC3, there has been a transition in the INC chairs, with the chair from Ecuador now replacing the chair from Peru. Next slide, please. With all of this in mind, all eyes are now set on Canada and how the negotiations will actually progress from having a bloated zero draft text, as well as not having the opportunity to engage on the treaty in an intersessional period between INC3 and INC4. Next slide, please. We would hope that this would be some of our expectations and that they will actually be met. Firstly, for the rules of procedure will be key for a strong treaty. It would be important that we now go into defining the full life cycle of plastics, which would make all of the difference. We have a mandate for intersessional work after INC4, and we ensure that ambitious countries make their voices loud and clear. Small island developing states have a lot at stake. Next slide, please. So with all of this said, there are definitely threats and challenges that have been highlighted throughout the negotiations. As with any policy process, the end result is dependent on the balance of power and negotiations between parties. In this case, countries that have a significant stake in the fossil fuel industry are pushing for a weaker treaty, and countries that are facing significant adverse effects of plastic pollution want to see stronger legally binding controls and upstream measures. So what are some of the threats and challenges? Next slide, please. We are still seeing many countries thinking that we can end plastic pollution by simply changing things in the midstream and downstream phases of the plastic's life cycle. These countries are deliberately ignoring any meaningful conversation in reducing plastic production and are instead touting that better design, alternative materials, and enhanced mitigation through technological advances will end plastic pollution. However, this will not be the case. In the face of unfettered growth in plastic production increasing exponentially over time, these changes will be nothing but a drop in the bucket and will fall far too short for us to envision a future without plastic pollution. So we need to stay abreast of the threats and the challenges, which include high fossil fuel and chemical industry influence in the plastic treaty negotiations, power struggles and geopolitics playing out, a constant emphasis on the downstream focus on waste management, promoting false solutions, delay tactics, and we also have a very tight negotiating time ahead of us. There's also a difference in low and weak ambition that we see playing out. There's conflicts with other multilateral environmental agreements, and we need to beware of a poor financial mechanism as well as being one of the key threats to this process. With that, I would like to say thank you, and I hope that I was able to do justice to taking you through what has been almost a year and a half now of negotiations in a very short space of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Merissa. And I believe we can move on to the next segment where we have Semee, Rhee from Break Free from Plastic speaking.
Thank you, Arpita. Hi, everyone. I'm Semee, and I'm with Break Free from Plastic. Thank you to GAIA for inviting me to this very valuable space where we get to do a comprehensive overview of the Plastics Treaty for those of you who may not be all that familiar with it. So today I'm here to talk more about the role of civil society, as I'm sure many of you who are joining us today are from your respective organizations and are playing a very vital role in making sure that civil society participation is guaranteed and heard. So next slide, please. So before we get started, we would have to first talk about who negotiators are and how this dynamic between civil society and negotiators kind of play out in INC spaces. So negotiators are often called country delegates as well. These are people who are actually attending the INC spaces. Country delegates come from different member states, which are also known as countries, and they're representing their respective national governments, coming to these different international fora and negotiation spaces to make sure that their national agendas are properly reflected in the conversations that take place. The role of these negotiators are to make sure that the negotiations of the language and the text of the prospective instrument are going in their different respective goals to attain those respective goals, and to make sure that these negotiators are also participating in multilateralism, which is a very key component of many of these international environmental agreements, something that has been going on for many decades, since really the time of multilateral environmental agreements. One key thing to highlight here is that when multilateralism is working at its best, every country comes away with taking away something that they wanted, but not everything. So each country needs to go into these spaces, keeping in mind that compromise is going to be needed to make sure that we find a way forward where everyone can come away with something that they want, but not everything. Next slide, please. So then who are observers or stakeholders vis-a-vis these negotiators? So observers and stakeholders are often interchangeably used in these spaces, and it really depends on how the structure of these negotiation spaces or different international fora really kind of identify these non-state actors. So for instance, under UNEP, also known as the United Nations Environment Program, there are 9 major groups, and these are business and industry, children and youth, farmers, indigenous peoples, local authorities, NGOs, where civil society organizations would fall under, scientific and technology community, women, workers, and trade unions. So these 9 major groups comprise stakeholders, or you could call them observers as well. Depending on the UN processes or the different international fora, these 9 major groups may be kind of lumped together and be called as observers. And so then the delineation of these 9 specific groups kind of are done away with, and you are lumped into this one big group called observers, which is the case of the INCs for the Plastics Treaty. So if you have ever seen a plenary for any of the INCs, you would see that there aren't any placards for these 9 major groups, specifically identifying the major groups representatives, but more so we're kind of collectively called as observers. In addition to these observers, you also have other stakeholders that are often invited into these spaces, and one of the really important ones are media. Media is very much important in the sense that they are kind of the the ears and also the mouthpiece to kind of help the information flow from these international negotiation spaces out into the public. They are very instrumental in making sure that, you know, we have a chance to influence the outside game. So for those of you who may not be so familiar with the terminology outside game, the outside game is basically anything that's kind of happening outside of like the current milieu or like the form that we're operating under. So anything, so that would be kind of inside those negotiation spaces. The outside game is more so kind of influencing the public or the optics of you know, seeing the INC process, or making sure that certain messages are delivered outside of the negotiation spaces to those who did not have privy to the information that were being shared inside the INC rooms. So yeah, that's, I would say media is probably one of the most important stakeholders that actually do play quite an important role in the INC process. Next slide, please. So then when you're inviting a lot of different people, including member states and also observers, and like I said, those, you know, observers from different backgrounds of, you know, 9 major groups, they're different interests and a wide-ranging spectrum of interest is going to happen. And oftentimes these could easily arise to a conflict of interest. And this is mainly because this is especially actually pronounced in many of these spaces where we are trying to regulate something. And so INC, the INC process for the Plastics Treaty is trying to regulate how we are dealing with plastics, how we're producing and managing and using, and also, you know, handling plastics. And so this is certainly a regulatory space, and oftentimes multilateral efforts within these spaces really kind of highlight the conflict of interest that becomes very apparent. So many entities or actors with far-reaching resources, oftentimes multinational like corporations or other industries, will have a very heavy hand in how the procedural aspect of these negotiation spaces kind of pan out. And so we need to rely so in order to make sure that the conflict of interest is handled properly, we need to rely on best available science. And we also need to make sure that these are independent of vested interests, because oftentimes these conflict of interest are not all that apparent, and you only know kind of after the fact, or you have to do some digging around to kind of figure out what is their almost hidden agenda for their participation or their interest in these processes. Next slide, please. So then I would also like to talk about the important role of CSOs within this kind of dynamic that I have just presented to you. Like I said, while CSOs, or also called observers or stakeholders, they're not the ones that directly negotiate the text of any of these international instruments, but they still play a really important role. And that's because oftentimes civil society organizations are the ones to have the firsthand knowledge of the realities that they face every day. They know what is working, they know what's not working. They also know what are the current realities of, you know, their everyday citizens that are facing the problems or the environmental, you know, destruction or the current realities that are creating this problem. So they really have that sort of firsthand knowledge that many of these government officials or agencies may not really be exposed to as much. CSOs also play a very important role when it comes to holding polluters and governments accountable for their actions and decisions. And this is because they do have that sort of firsthand knowledge, and because, you know, they really do kind of know the different actors and the different stakeholders or entities that have kind of created that situation, and also could be the ones that enable solutions to come to the fore. Another reason why CSOs are important is because they ensure that the demands of the people are taken into consideration. They're almost like the representatives of their communities, or even like regional or national communities as well too sometimes. And last but not least, CSOs are really important because they often play a critical role as watchdogs. And I'll get more into this in the next slide. And this is absolutely important because oftentimes the success of a particular instrument or a treaty really depends on the implementation and how well that is being complied with. So next slide, please. So like I said, CSOs are keeping watch on compliance, and they have really fulfilled this role for many, many years. You see so many different communities, societies, really across the world, where CSOs really step up to the plate and really fulfill this role. And I think this is really transnational. So even if we succeed at getting an ambitious international legally binding instrument, we still need to ensure that the implementation measures are met and that parties to the instrument are in compliance with those obligations. A very successful treaty will have that sort of implementation measure or a compliance measure baked into the treaty text to ensure that that's properly carried out, and the depository or the secretary of that instrument will be the ones that are overseeing that process. But sometimes that may not be the case, and oftentimes the critical role of CSOs stepping into this role is really kind of what makes a treaty successful or not sometimes. And this is also precisely why we are calling on countries to have national implementation plans over national action plans or nationally determined contributions, targets, or obligations, because national implementation plans are actually kind of based on that multilateral environmental agreement that provides the obligations that nations or parties that are signed onto that instrument need to abide by. And so it really provides those sort of implementation measures that are directly connected to the obligations under that multilateral environmental agreement. Whereas national action plans tend to be a little bit broader in nature, and they're also not necessarily always legally binding. So it may be relevant to the multilateral environmental agreement and may be tangential at best, but it oftentimes doesn't have that sort of strong implementation measure or the legally binding nature that enables us to be sure that the national action plans can actually carry out the obligations that are explicitly laid out in the instrument. Next slide, please. So again, this is why civil society participation is crucial and critical in multilateral environmental fora. And I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of you who are playing this very important role in your respective organizations. And we look forward to having you more of you be participating and engaged with the INC process for the Plastics Treaty. Thank you. Over to you, Arpita.
Thank you so much, Semee, for that very, very useful information. I'm very sure that members who are present in the room today have been able to understand the role of civil society and different actors better and the dynamics they're in. We now have to move on to our fifth part, and this is the penultimate part, where we actually get into the nitty-gritty of what our members have been doing across different countries to organize and to advocate for a strong treaty. So we have 3 case studies for you today to learn from. And we are starting with Vietnam Zero Waste Alliance, and we have our very own Xuan, who will be presenting and speaking about that. And then next we will have Aliansi Zero Waste Indonesia. We have Abdul Ghofar presenting. And lastly, Alliance of Indian Wastepickers. We will have a recorded presentation from Kabir Jalandhari. Soon over to you.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for GAIA for this useful workshop. And you already hear Arpita, Anna, and other colleagues talking about the I very impressive with the ingredient to have a effective treaty. And also the role of the civil society. And so, as the negotiator is the country. So our duty, like as NGO, is to engage the government and try to influence them to show a strong position, ambitious goal to the global productivity. So next slide, please. So we try to influence them, but how? So here's my experience to engage them. First, we need to know who they are. So in case of Vietnam, we explore and we come to their office and talking with the focal point, understand what they need. So next slide, please. Yes, so here's we try to use all of the opportunity to understand them. The first two picture here is we met them in the INC2 in Paris. We try to sit with them, and our colleagues also have a chance to talk with the delegates. The header of the delegation, but unfortunately, the header is changing. So in INC3, here the new delegation head is another one. So we continue to engage them by trying to sit with them and understand them, understand what they need. We also organize some side event for the delegation of Vietnam, to talk with our international partner. So the ultimate goal is to give them the input to convince them to show their strong position to the global productivity. So here is our some of the result from our engagement. Next slide, please. So we have to influence them. We need them to love us and to trust us. So we understand their needs. They want to have a knowledge, and also they also need some resource to organize a consultation workshop. In this consultation workshop, they invite all of the national stakeholders to share about the global productivity, how it works, how it will affect the country. So we take this opportunity, we support them, and we try to be we will try to have a presentation each time in this consultation workshop. So the first four picture is in the August 2023. I have a chance to share the reflection of the INGO about the draft, I think. Yes. Yes, and then also the last two picture is about the workshop in INC before INC3. Yeah, so in all of this workshop, I have a chance to be here and transfer the input, share the position of all of the international NGO, and we try to deliver some key message, like Anna already said in her presentation. For example, in this workshop, I am able to deliver the message of the importance of reduce virgin plastic, in order to address the plastic pollution. Yes. So we will continue to have a good relationship with the Vietnam delegation, try to transfer on of the knowledge that we have, and try to convince them to show the strong pollution to the global plastic treaty. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Xuan. And we are glad that you've been able to form a very strong relationship with the Vietnamese delegation and really move them over the course of the last few INCs. And wishing you all the best for the upcoming consultation in Vietnam. With that, let me pass it over to Asri's Ghofar. Are you here?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Arpita. Thank you, Xuan, to starting the national context and what GAIA's member works on the plastic treaty. Hello, everyone. My name is Ghofar, a steering committee member of Alliance for Zero Waste Indonesia. Consists of the 10 organizations, and 10 of organizations is the member of the GAIA. Next slide, please. I would like to sharing the experience on our alliance for lobbying and campaigning process in the context of the plastic treaty with the government of Indonesia, and how we engage with the government regarding to the global plastic treaty. First thing, we need to know who they are. What we mean is to understanding who is the head of the delegates, which ministerial level working on this global plastic treaty. For example, the national focal point is Ministry of the Environment and Forestry in Indonesia, and the others ministerial level also part of the global plastic treaty. So we need to understanding who they are, who the delegates of from the governments. And after that, we did actor mapping, because we cannot like starting lobbying, campaigning, advocating, engaging with them if we are not understand the actor mapping. It means like who has the power to have a decisions making process. So we need to engage at least the head of delegates. It's coming from the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, but there is also participation from Ministry of Industry, coordinating Ministry for Maritime and Investment, for example, and there is a participation from the private sector, the recycling associations, the petrochemical industry. So we need to understand the actor mapping from the government delegates. After that, we did the position of the government of Indonesia on the strategic issue. For example, we need to understanding the government position on recycling, the government position on reuse, the government position on the demanding from civil society, for example, on plastic production reduction. And after that, we need to mapping in which part we can engaging with the government. Oh, we can engage with them to asking them support our call on the reuse, because there is alignment between us. But for like pros and cons position, for example, on recycling, for example, we need to working like softly support them with the research from the scientist coalition, for example, from the others scientific evidence, so we can engage them with the pros and cons topic, for example, in recycling context. So we need to know their position on the strategy issue, and then similar experience with Xuan, we need to know their needs, what the government delegates need during the INC, pre-INC, intersectional issue within the INC to the other INC, and of course in the national consultation. So if we know their needs, we can put, oh, they need scientific evidence, they need the research, they need the capacity building on the chemical of concern, for example, polymer products and the other. So we can support, we can provide, okay, we can support as civil society, we can support on the several topics, or we can connect with the others. We can connect them with the science coalition, we can connect them with the other alliances or the countries that have a strong position on the plastic treaty. And the last two things that we did we provide input on strategic issue. Some of our member submit written submissions in the ANC Secretariat, but also written recommendation to the government. For example, Diet Plastic Indonesia submitted the recommendation on the urgency to support reuse. Nexus 3 also submitted the recommendation to the governments. ICEL also submitted the recommendation to the governments on the some issue. So we need to provide input on strategic issue. And the last but not least, we need to dividing roles among CSO delegates. In ASWI, we have at least 4 and until 5 organizations that working closely, working specifically on the plastic treaty, and we divided the roles among us. Next slide, please. And this is the example how we did actor analysis. The head of delegation for plastic treaty is Ministry of Environment, but there is also participation from the other minister. And we need to connecting between the domestic regulation and international legislation that will implement after the plastic treaty. So we need to find alignment. So we have alignment on the reuse, we have alignment on the other things. So we need to make it like connecting that what we discuss in the international level, it's linking with the national level. Next slide, please. Yeah, to alignment. Next, this is our planning for the upcoming negotiation, ANC4, ANC5, and the last negotiation. Next slide, there are 3 parts. So we already discussing the distribution of our works. Some organization working to assist the Indonesian delegates, working closely, provide the substance of the plastic treaty, connecting them, understanding the issue. And then we also working for the national consultation, not only with the government, but also with the civil society, with the climate block, with the energy block, with the health CSO. So we need to have public pressure together, not only to the government, but also to companies that also present on the national context and also in the international forum. And the last, we will support for assess possibility through to strengthening the Indonesian delegates with others country and experts. So we need to have a support to Indonesian position for reuse, for example, and we need to strengthening their position on the issue on the full solution, for example. So we need to connect with them, not only with Indonesia, but for example, archipelagic island state or small island developing state, or especially on the Asia Pacific government's position. So we need to conduct 3 key activities in the upcoming ANC4 and ANC5. Thank you very much. This is what we are doing, how to engage with the government and how to strengthening their position, and also put the pressure to the public sector, private sector that also participate during plastic treaty negotiations. Thank you. Back to Arpita.
Thank you so much, Ghofar. I think this was very, very interesting in how you also talked about the relationship between international and local legislation and the strategic point of view about connecting different countries with similar context. And that is definitely something we are looking to support, and it's already a work in progress. I'm now going to call upon Kabir Jalandhari, who is from the Alliance of Indian Wastepickers. He will be presenting. We are almost towards the end of our webinar today, so if you have any questions, any at all, please feel free to post them and we'll really try to address those at the end.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Kabir. I coordinate Alliance of Indian Wastepickers, and I also support the Asia Pacific outreach of International Alliance of Wastepickers. I am today presenting the position of International Alliance of Wastepickers with regards to the Plastics Treaty Negotiation, INC4. And as you know, International Alliance has been a part of the discussion of Plastics Treaty since the UNIA 5.2. And so there are some of the things that we want. We are okay with the existing revised zero draft, but we prefer stronger options in the revised zero draft. In addition to that, we are looking at a possibility that the governments define terms such as just transition, wastepickers, workers in. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Kabir. I
Apologies, I think we are trying to resolve why the volume was low. Dan, Trish, please share any update. Just give us a few seconds.
Unia 5.2. And so there are some of the things that we want. We are okay with the existing revised zero draft, but we prefer stronger options in the revised zero draft. In addition to that, we are looking at a possibility that the governments define terms such as just transition, waste pickers, workers in informal and cooperative settings. The reference to just transitions definition is already there, that the member states will be working on it. But what we are asking is that the other two terms should also be included in the definition list and be defined. In addition to that, we want the provisions of just transition in the preamble, scope, and section on waste management retained, as well as in places where it already exists. Then wherever the mention of waste pickers is done, we want it to be retained throughout the text. In options where the reference to waste pickers is in slightly less stronger options, then we prefer stronger options with the reference to waste pickers made in those stronger options. These are the few major demands of International Alliance, and we have a detailed position paper which provides you what section we want to work. But to just give you in preamble, for preamble, we welcome the mention of waste pickers and other workers in informal and cooperative settings in the preamble, recognizing as the key constituents of the proposed legal instrument. Similarly, when we go down in our position paper, we have definition. We talk about just transition definition, which waste pickers have proposed. Then we have definition of waste pickers and workers in informal and cooperative settings. And in terms of scope, option 1 is preferable to us, with a reference to ensure just transition added to the scope itself. Then in most sections where we are talking about phasing out of certain kind of plastics, we recommend that parties shall, in implementing this provision, take appropriate measures to facilitate a just transition. So that's something which we have, especially in the sectors where we are asking that those materials should be phased out. The workers in those sectors should also have employment and livelihood opportunities, and this is why we are recommending that there should be just transition. Similarly, we have in our biggest focus is on waste management section, as well as in the just transition provision, which already exist in the section. We are overall happy with the framing of the text. We prefer the option 1, and we have made that references to the existing text, that there should be reparations, living income, and livelihood opportunities for waste pickers and other workers in cooperative settings. Then we've also welcomed the reference to strong social safety net for waste pickers. And for us, the key demand, the member states have been pushing very sort of very at a very basic level, legal recognition. We are a little more specific in our recommendations. We seek that there should be universal registration and issuance of occupational ID cards. And legal recognition, the only way to make sure that the legal recognition reach at the local grassroots level, it is important that the member states ensure this provision is part of the discussion itself. If universal occupational ID card, universal registration occupational ID card does not get through here, we will continue to demand some sort of an extra or subsequent discussions that it should be reported on in national reporting. We prefer the language on national action plans, and in addition, we in the national action plans, we make reference to waste pickers and other workers in cooperative settings. We also welcome that the member states have been recommended to report on just transition. We would like the brackets to be removed on the just transition provision. So these are the key things that we have been asking. We will be a smaller delegation than past. We have 2 senior waste picker leaders joining with us from Latin America. Then we have Similarly, we have 2 Wastepicker leaders who are joining us from Asia Pacific and 3 Wastepicker leaders from African region, one from Europe, and Bobby, as you know, she will be joining from US. But we also have Canadian Wastepickers Cooperative, which is based in Montreal. Some of our colleagues will be joining from there. So that's our delegation. We are still struggling with visa applications. I think the only set of workers who have received the visa application are my colleagues in India, but it's been a very big challenge for us. So hopefully we'll be able to make it to Canada and see you there. Thank you. Bye.
Really appreciating Kabir for making time and sending us his recording and the draft position on revised Euro draft from the Wastepickers International Alliance is also in the chat box in case anyone wants to refer. I do want to apologize on behalf of those speakers who could not be here, but let me assure you that they've been busy doing what they do best, advocating for a strong treaty, being present in different spaces and ensuring that our demands are heard. So I hope you will recognize that. And with that, we have come to the closing of today's session. Very quickly, we wanted to ensure that we provide some call to actions on our participants here on how they can get involved, given that we have diversity of people who are currently tuned in from civil society, media, to young fellows from our very own Zero Waste Academy and from across the globe. So I have 2 slides on different call to actions, and don't worry, we'll be sending these slides across as well. Of course, like so many of us have talked about, you can influence your country focal points in the treaty. You can develop a strategy, very much inspired by what Ghofar was presenting from the Indonesian Alliance on how do you build relationship, on how do you delegate work, and how do you strengthen different country positions, as well as ensure that there are capacity building workshops and there is movement building happening in your regions as well. You would also be remiss if you don't sort of push for national policy impacts. We know many of our members are doing that through different tactics, through brand audits, through demanding, through very various researches to really recognize the need to eliminate problematic polymers and chemicals. Next slide, please. I'm going over fairly quickly because of time. But last but not the least you can do for our movement is to endorse the open letter, to sign the petition that we have here linked, to ensure that you're supporting those on the front lines who are fighting the strong fight and really trying their level best to ensure the treaty is just, the treaty is robust, and it really prioritizes upstream action as well as eliminates toxics for all of our better health. You could also gather a community of supporters to hold screening of story of plastic. We could have people sign up the treaty petition. There is shorter version. You could also write letters to your community on behalf of your community to your country focal point. BFFB has this fantastic template letter already available. So all you need to do is make a copy of it and look up your country focal point and send it across. And all of these small efforts, which might seem really minuscule to you when you're doing it, would really make a long difference in our battle. And like I have realized lately, this fight is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So we need to do everything that we possibly can. Next slide. Yes, and these are some of the links on how you can design your campaign, social media action. We will have both from GAIA, BFFB, and as I imagine from other allied movements, new treaty messaging guide, as well as comms, a toolkit to help you in your comms effort. Thank you, Semee, for posting the link there. But also we will make public our revised zero draft analysis from GAIA. It's already available from the allies like CL and others. And we will also be putting together an INC4 toolkit. That's something that we do for each INC as GAIA to help our members in their advocacy. So please reach out to us if you need copies of those. Some of those copies have already been disseminated, but the official public releases would happen very soon, I believe in the next week or so. Next slide. I think it's time for some questions. We have a few, but please feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to read out Arm's question. He asks, I would be interested to hear what the panelists think could be the possible scenarios and outcomes of INC4. Will we actually get a first draft? Will there be intersessional work? Is it likely that certain provisions will be eliminated? I know it's very difficult to predict right now, but it would be great to hear some perspectives from experienced people on this regard. And I'm sure this is a question on everyone's mind, and there's no definitive answer, but keen to hear, Semee, from you, what you think could happen, and also invite Merissa to follow.
Sure. Thank you, Arpita. So thank you for your question. I think at this point, I guess we would just have to kind of decide whether we want to be pessimists or optimists, and I don't want to commit to either because I want to give INC4 a fighting chance. With that being said, this revised zero draft is rather concerning for many of us, and this is not just for civil society, but actually for member states as well. Some even call it a sub-zero draft just because of this additional options that oftentimes just seem like very superfluous options that don't really provide any sort of meaningful addition to the text that we originally had. And with that being said, the revised zero draft as it stands is a very difficult document to even start negotiations. And so we envision that INC4 is going to be a place where we whittle down that revised zero draft as much as possible. I believe there's going to be many informals probably happening during these contact groups that are going to be structuring the schedule or the really kind of like the layout of like how INC4 is going to get carried out. And we'll learn about that as we inch closer to the INC4 dates. But with that being said, sure, during these consultations, negotiations, discussions, it really depends on the level of ambition that the member states come with. And that could potentially lead to many options, or hopefully many options, that aren't really providing any sort of substantive value to just kind of fall to the wayside, and really leaving us with the best options that will actually lead us to have a very successful treaty. I think wrapping INC3 up with no mandate to have intersessional work is the importance and the omission of that is really showing right now. And so I highly doubt that the chair or the secretariat will repeat that again. And I think most likely we will probably have some sort of intersessional work hopefully be mandated. You can never predict anything for certain, right? And so, yeah, those would just kind of be my so-called predictions. But honestly, anything could happen at these INCs. And so far, the previous INCs there wasn't really anything substantial or notable to show for. And we're really hoping that INC4 is going to be different this time around. So perhaps Merissa might have something more to add. So over to you.
Yeah, with this new chair, I think the expectation is high. Merissa, from your intel into the African group, what would you like to share publicly?
Thanks, Arpita, and thanks, Semee. And I think I will stick to the trajectory of being optimistic in giving INC4 a fighting chance. And just maybe touching on what Arpita has said is that we are seeing the new chair being rather active and being proactive in the sense that the way he sort of tried to course correct the structure of this INC4 to be much more we optimize our time much more in a productive manner and try and best navigate through the bloated zero draft. I call it a bloated zero draft because for me, that is exactly what it is. It's an unmanageable document that member states themselves are grappling with, trying to figure out how to navigate and how to best make up their minds on the options that it presents. However, that said, just from an African perspective and just from a general perspective is that I wouldn't say that the positions of member states have changed completely based on what they're looking at in the zero draft, because the first draft was where member states really, made their mind up as to what they wanted included, I would say, and which options they didn't like. And I wouldn't say that, this revised zero draft, yes, whilst it is, the text in it is quite, it's quite impossible to navigate through. It hasn't changed much of what is in their minds on what they want to be included and not included. But that said, it doesn't make things any easier in trying to remove the fluff and put forward a straightforward position. So I would just say that just keeping the optimism is that based on the fact that INC4 will have a few informal groups and the way that the contact groups have been structured will hopefully allow us to spend more time on actually negotiating the options that are present in the text and hopefully get us to the first treaty draft. I guess the crux of letting in intersessional work off our hands between INC3 and INC4 has proven to be a rather bad decision. I would say the very least, because it hasn't given us the opportunity to engage further in substantive discussions with a few months at hand, going into the INC4. So I would only hope that that would also be course corrected at the end of INC4 and that we would have a mandate for intersessional work, but a mandate that is not at the loss of any important topics for intersessional work, because that was one of the reasons we didn't get intersessional work, a mandate for intersessional work at INC3, is because member states could not decide on what topics they wanted intersessional work to be held on, and we couldn't afford losing, the upstream measures to be discussed in the intersessional period either. So that was the reason of having no mandate for intersessional work, I would say, during this period. But yeah, I hope I was able to answer that well enough, and it is still something that is a question mark on all of our minds, is what will really be the outcomes of INC4. But we would hope that it would be what Semee and I have just mentioned. Thanks, Arpita. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks so much, Merissa, for your perspective. I think, lastly, we should remain optimistic, but also I'd like to believe that we should have our ammunition ready, our talking points, our counter arguments on rules of procedure, why upstream is important, the economic argument that some of us have been trying to push, which is so important for the Global South, to ensure that we are providing those resources to our delegates, not necessarily at the INC, but before INC as well, to ensure that they are able to substantially speak, as well as empower the delegates, especially those who have been quiet, through capacity building, through different resources, and through really supporting them, sometimes, being available to them at odd hours in the night to sort of help answer their questions. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that go into all of it, as you all know. There's a lot of spying that we all do, as Semee and Merissa would vouch for, as well as Xuan and Ghofar. But we will keep trying, and we'll keep hoping for a good outcome. We also have a question from Sipeng Wong, our member from Malaysia. She asked, appreciate some learnings on how did industry manage to come to an agreement in the Montreal Protocol to declare caps and phase down targets of ODS in the successful MEA. I believe she would like to hear what were the learnings from Montreal Protocol I don't know if any of you have any insight, but Semee, could I ask on you to help with this, please?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Sipeng. And I think this is really important and a good learning experience that we could take on for the INC process for the Plastics Treaty, because the Montreal Protocol is really kind of hailed as one of the most successful multilateral environmental agreements, right? And so for those of you who may not know, ODS means ozone depleting substances. And this particular, so Montreal Protocol is a really good learning experience because we saw some really good engagement from the industry. I think we oftentimes, we are very, I think, quick to probably peg the industry as our enemy, or like the counterpart to our efforts in making sure that we have a successful treaty. But we all know that in order for us to have a successful treaty, we need the industry to come with us. And the Montreal Protocol ended up being successful because the industry changed its ways of doing business. And it was because they had the willpower and the desire to finally come to, not only the realization, but also the will and the desire to change their business practices, to change the different substances that they were using that were not as destructive to the ozone. It was because of their participation and their willingness to change that really led to the Montreal Protocol being successful. And this is exactly what we need for the Plastics Treaty too. We already know that it is possible to take out those hazardous chemicals that are being used in plastics out. We know that industry can do that. We know that there are other much safer alternatives in terms of chemical substances that can actually provide and provide us a pathway out from business as usual. And so we really need industry to kind of really, be on board, get on with the program, really realize that, the precautionary principle can be really used in these spaces, and, without them having any sort of economic impact in their businesses. And so we really hoped that businesses and industries that are also envisioning and aspiring for a successful treaty to, come on board and really pave the way for us. We need good businesses, good industry, good business practices to really provide that sort of leadership to make sure that other industry will follow suit.
Super. Thank you so much for addressing that question, Semee. With that, we come to the end. Next slide. And thank you so much for those of you who managed to stay till the very end. You could scan this QR code to look at different resources we have within GAIA. But I also wanted to plug in the fact that on Monday, on the 25th of March, we have another workshop, another panel discussion on conflict of interest from the negotiating halls to frontline communities at 3 p.m. GMT +2. So please be sure to join it. It's again going to be filled with experts from around the globe, which is organized and hosted by our Africa office. But they've agreed to welcome all of us. So please leverage this opportunity, because this is one of the main key issues that we are facing in the treaty. With that, I would just thank everyone who made time to be here. Please look out for our emails from my colleague Patricia or Trish Parras on different ways you can engage, the resources, the recording, everything that you heard here available at your hands. Thank you so much, and wherever you are, wish you all the very best for the next INC, and keep doing the good work.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.